Welcome back, you guys. It's Mr. Eddie Barber. This is the YouTube Barber Academy, and if you are feeling like you are just stuck in life, if you're feeling like you're ready for a change, if you're feeling like you want to step out of your comfort zone and try a new career, maybe it's late in life for you, maybe it's early, whatever it is, man, if you want to do it, we're going to do it here. We're going to get into it, we're going to learn it, and we're going to help you guys change that career. So if barbering's what you want to do, you're in the right place. Keep it locked. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that bell, and don't miss these live feeds because it's going to be dope. So let's get into this tutorial, you guys. Like in a good spot. How about right there? Just out of reach. If you think I'm making money like that from this YouTube channel, you got me. But there was a dope ass car that one of my clients brought in, gave me some inspiration, and the truth of the matter is, a lot of good things are starting to happen for me. I want you guys to join me on my lives. These are not just me going live. Like, this is an actual broadcast. We will be bringing on really cool guests, surprise guests. We'll be doing giveaways. And more importantly than anything to me is we'll be able to teach a very intuitive way. So I'm actually teaching classes the exact same way I taught for 10 years at an actual barber school. I'm teaching them now for free on the YouTube channel. And the way that we're getting by, man, the way that we're getting by donations, and we're getting by a couple sponsorships. So, you know, stuff like that is definitely helpful. So any way that you guys could support the channel, it's appreciated. I'm not looking for anybody to go broke over here. We're just trying to make a living. So without further ado, you guys seen the title. I get your attention with that. Before I go any further with these blurry fades and all these buzzwords, haircutting really hasn't changed a whole lot. And to be honest, the blend is actually very simple to learn. Once it clicks, but it takes that moment for it to click, and once it does, it'll become a lot easier for you to understand. So let's get started with this tutorial. Okay, we're gonna begin with the 5-0 line. So we've talked about this many times, but I'm going to begin wherever I decide I want to make the fade. So before we go any further, how do I decide where I want this fade to begin? I simply just ask my client, do you want a high fade, a low fade, something in the middle? And generally when people ask for high fades, you can always explain to the client like, hey, if you give me a little bit more room, I can make a smoother blend. And sometimes people go for that, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like military people and they want it really, really high. That's a different kind of haircut. That's not what we're talking about today. But once you've established what we're going to do, we're going to do that with a 5-0 line. So I'm just going to put the 5-0 line here, and that's going to begin the process for us. Now, I never like to actually go all the way around the entire head. I like to jump from one side. Once I get about to the occipital bone in the back, I jump to the other side, and then I stand in front of the client. I make sure that it's even on both sides. If it turns out it's a little bit higher on one side than the other, then guess what? Bring that side up a little bit, you'll be in business. So once you have established a good, clean 5-0 line, we're going to begin the skin process. And when we get to this line, this is probably the most important part about this little step, is the fact that this jump is really small, right? 5 zeros is as close as we can cut with a machine, and skin is the very next step down. And as long as our machine is zero gapped, or at least close to 5 zeros, so if you have a trimmer, that's another way to achieve it. And we will be able to get to the skin, to the 5-0 easy by stopping just before we get close to that line and begin flicking out. So my makeshift clipper right here in my phone, I'll begin flipping out. And I can also use a technique like peppering. Moving down with the grain also is effective as well. So now we're getting started on the blend, and you guys see me using that wrist movement with the lever wide open. We're gonna put it in the open taper line. So I'm gonna stop the video here for a second. Let's talk about this for a minute. As of right now, you were able to establish a very easy skin to 5-0 line. Now, there's people out there who will fight me and say, don't put in lines, they're too hard to get out, you're making more work for yourself. Some of that is true, and especially for some beginners, and especially if your equipment is not set up properly. That's why it's so important to zero gap your stuff. If you want to be able to fly, if you want to be able to go fast through these cuts, definitely going to need your equipment set up properly. And we talk about that on the live feeds, and we'll talk about that in some of these videos that I drop. And you guys can ask whatever questions you want. You know, every Saturday night, 8 p.m., we do it. So let's go to open taper. All right, so here's my 5-0 line, and I just simply put the open taper line in. I got my fast feed here, and I'm gonna put it in the open position. And just to describe to you guys what I'm doing, I'm just simply holding it flat. This is something that I see you guys messing up a lot. So flat, obviously on a curved blade, flat's gonna be here, it's not gonna be here. This is a distinction that I don't think a lot of people are realizing how important it is to stay anchored to the head and actually get your open taper length down. Because if you're angling this in any way, the chances are pretty high that you are not actually getting the open taper length proper. And that's what this all really relies on. And the manufacturer has created lengths that have, the manufacturers have created clipper guards and a system that balances and works with each other. And they have set you up to succeed with very little wrist movement, very little flicking is absolutely necessary. You don't actually have to flick. A lot of people think you do, but you don't. And if your machines are set up properly, you're not going to need to. So we're starting with this open taper. We create that secondary guideline. And now the very next step is going up close to where we went, but we're gonna close this taper slightly. So I just moved this down, we'll say 1/4 of the way, and we're keeping it flat. And the moment I begin working out this line, I wanna make sure that I got my clipper on a slight angle and I'm holding it flat. So slight angle, holding it flat, all right? And this is a little move that you guys seen me use when I originally put the line in. I like to hold it kind of on the angle here, and I do like to use the C motion. I'm using kind of mostly fingers, but a little bit of wrist to put in that guide, and that's just something I do, like a speed thing, kind of helps me get into the mother lengths, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. However, with the blade closed about 1/4 of the way, we're gonna begin moving it on an angle, keeping it flat, and staying just below where we went with that open taper guard. Then we're gonna move down, we're gonna close it just a little bit more, we're gonna repeat the process. We're gonna keep going as I begin to get closer to these bottom lengths. Once I have this entirely closed, keeping it on an angle, working it back and forth. And then there's also a trick that you could also use too, which I don't advise people do, especially if their clippers are zero gapped. You don't really want to do too much raking, but this is a step that you could take. If that last line is being real stubborn, there's a good chance you might even have to return to your trimmer, which is perfectly fine, perfectly normal. Go through your trimmer, couple quick taps, and we out. Once this part is done, the rest of it is very simple, and it will actually all come out for you. It's just going to be a case of you repeating the same process with your next numbers, and understanding how these things balance together is probably the most important thing when it comes to the blend, which I have a lesson planned about the blend that we're going to go into on the live Q&A. We're going to use some video help, and we're going to talk about it in depth. But just as a quick kind of understanding, I'm using a number 1 right now, and I'm moving just above the parietal ridge. And in this clipper, in this haircut, we're actually not going to use clipper over comb. I'm actually going to use, I think I used like a 7 on top. But anyways, we're going to use the number 1. We got it open, and we're going to repeat the exact same process. However, if I was to take somebody's whole head and I shave the whole thing with a number 2, right? What could I take into a number 2 that's not going to create a line? Simply underneath, I could just take a 1.5 open. And obviously, if we're using Andis or if we're using wall, we've talked about this a lot on the channel. But depending on what you're using, if you're using a wall, they got a 1 1/2. And if you open it, you take that into a 2, you're not going to make no line because it's so close together. There's actually a little bit of overlap there. What I could do into a 1.5 open is I could take a 1.5 closed all the way around the head, staying just a little bit lower than I went with the 1.5 open. I could take a 1 open all the way around, 1 closed all the way around, and I can keep stepping down. So if I wanted to go half open, half closed, open, taper, closed, taper, trimmer, skinner. Yeah, so I mean, this is the progression, and in all fades, just it's easy to kind of get. It's easy to kind of get the idea that you're not able to learn this, or that you're screwing up, or that there's something wrong with you or whatever. Just be patient with yourself. You're not supposed to know this. You are supposed to struggle. These things are actually pretty difficult to execute. It's very simple for me to explain this to you, but until you go and put this into action, you know, that's when you're going to actually learn. But all blends are basically doing the same thing. we're coming from nothing or we're coming from something, and it's progressively getting longer. So if I had the 2 here and we were all the way down to skin here, the only real issue here is how I'm going to approach this. How am I going to take it from skin into that number 2? And then also kind of knowing what you should do to stop. So like, you notice how I'm in the parietal ridge area right now. I have a few shadows. This kid's hair is really straight. It's very dark. His scalp is really light. It's going to show off pretty much any mistake that you make in this scenario, which is why I can leave a little bit of that weight. I can leave a little bit of that bulk. I can leave a little bit of that darkness, because I know that I can go back with scissor over comb, or thinning shear or texturizing shears over comb, or freehand texturizing shears, which is a technique that I use a lot as well, but I did not use on this particular client. However, I wouldn't have done that if I didn't understand. I would have maybe tried to charge in there with one of my other guards or with one of my other things, and I probably would have made it even worse. So this is something that comes with experience. You will eventually learn where to call it quits and when to switch to the next tool. And, you know, generally speaking, if you take a little less off each time, you're probably going to save yourself from going too far and going overboard with the process. So, you know, you just want to be careful and step through your process, you know, and understand what you're doing so that you don't get lost. Now, in the event that you do get lost, let's say that you've done the 1, you've done the 0, you've done the open taper, and you're just totally lost. That's cool. That's cool. Okay. Take your headphones out. Make sure that you're able to listen to your clipper. Okay. And let's start with a longer attachment. So maybe start with a 2, open the 2, go up till you hear some noise, right? You hear some noise, you know it's cutting, you know that that's about the length that you left off at. We can simply begin to close that number 2. See if you still hear some noise, stay a little bit lower. And then we can do this little trick. It's called like the way I call it like kind of trapping your fade. So let's say that we know that there's some kind of mistake in between the 2 and the half guard, right? So that is like a terrible 2. So in between the 2 and the half guard, we know that there's some kind of mistake here and we're lost and we don't know how to fix it, right? Very simple, okay? We come in with the 2. We come in with the 2, bam, we got the 2. So we know that that's the upper length, and we know that around the 0.5 is where the trouble begins. So the trouble is somewhere in here. Now, in order to trap the hair, we're going to use the 1 1/2, because again, as we talked about earlier, 1 1/2 going into a number 2 is not going to create an additional line, right? So we can just simply go in there and we can trap the blend. So we've just trapped the blend. We know for a fact that it's perfect between 1.5 open and 2 closed, right? We begin closing this up a little bit, and it's simply going just below. We begin closing this up a little bit, and we go just below with the 1 1/2 closed. Okay, so we know that we did it with the 1 1/2 open, 1 1/2 closed. So we've pretty much trapped the fade in between that 2 and that 1, and now we know that this issue is somewhere between the 0.5 closed and that. So again, we trap the blend again. We go with a 1 open, and then we go with a 1 closed. So we're simply leaving this blend no place to go, no place to make mistakes. And most often you're going to make a mistake when you begin to rush. So let's say that you're deep in this haircut, you're making mistakes, you're not getting through it. So you grab a guard that you shouldn't have grabbed, and you go a little bit too high and you create a light spot. Now you're going to waste even more time, because when you go back through it, it's going to be even harder to fix. You're going to have issues and you're going to struggle. So like I'm saying, is just be patient, and be patient with yourself, especially towards the beginning of your learning. Definitely just take the time, find some friends that'll let you practice on them. Take the time that it will take, and just step through the blend carefully without removing too much. Now, this sounds super, super easy to say, and believe me, I have seen it a million times. How many times I've explained something and I've seen people charge in there with all this like can-do attitude and all these good vibes, and they charge in there and they kind of fall flat. After a little while, they're like, hey man, you made it seem really easy when you explained it, but you know, now I'm kind of struggling. Is there something you see me doing? And yeah, of course, usually the number 1 mistake that I've ever seen people make is they're not holding the guard flat. They're leaving the head too much. They've listened to too many of these barbers that told them they need to flick. They need to keep this wrist motion. None of that's true, man. You really don't need to flick. If all your tools are nice and set properly, leaving the head and flicking is not even necessary. Now, a lot of people think that flicking means that you need to flip all the way off the head. Like, that's not true either. You can flick in the C motion, and you can begin and you can stay anchored on the head. So when you begin with it, you slide that heel of that blade up, and you can stay anchored on the head. So, you know, that's what we're talking about when some people say flick. Generally, they're trying to skip steps. Now, you shouldn't be trying to skip steps if you're just starting out. That's certainly something that we'll talk about as you advance in your barbering career. So, I'm about to get up out of here, man. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And furthermore, please join me Saturday Night Live, 8 p.m. We got a good Q&A session, guests, the whole 9 yards. And I want to give a quick shout out to my sponsors, Gamma. If you guys head over to Gamma, you want to buy anything from Gamma, use the code Eddie and you'll get 10% off your order plus free shipping and whatever else. So head on over to Gamma. That helps the channel. That helps me to grow. And I really appreciate you guys for helping me out. Any links in the description down below. You guys can check them out. I'm actually creating a syllabus for each one of the lessons that I release on them Saturday Night Lives. And, you know, they're going to be super cool. I think it's going to be a really big and helpful thing for a lot of people. So that's all I got for you guys today, man. I am Mr. Eddie Barber. This is the YouTube Barber Academy. Thank you guys for stopping in, listening, hanging out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.